Political feuds have long been a defining feature of human society, driven by clashing ideologies, power struggles, and competing interests. These intense disputes, often rooted in deep-seated divisions, shape the course of politics and have far-reaching consequences. At their core, political feuds emerge from the divergent perspectives and conflicting goals held by individuals and groups within the political landscape. Political feuds can arise at various levels, from the inter-party conflicts within a nation to the geopolitical rivalries between countries. They can be driven by differences in policy approaches, conflicting visions of governance, or personal animosities among key figures. Often fueled by heated rhetoric, these feuds can escalate rapidly, leading to polarization, gridlock, or even violence. While political feuds can hinder progress and create divisions within societies, they can also serve as catalysts for change. They bring issues to the forefront, mobilize citizens, and generate public discourse. At times, political feuds give rise to critical debates, leading to policy reforms and societal advancements. But sometimes it takes a dark turn. Today, on History in Minutes, we'll be looking back at one of the hottest and darkest political feuds in American history. The feud between Jimmy Hoffa and Robert Kennedy was a high-stakes clash that unfolded during a critical period in American history. Jimmy Hoffa, a prominent labor union leader, and Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States in the 1960s, found themselves on opposite sides of the spectrum. Hoffa, as the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, wielded immense power and was known for his controversial methods, alleged ties to organized crime, and his strong influence over the labor movement. I know what you're thinking. Why did these two gentlemen hate each other? The rivalry between Jimmy Hoffa, the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, and Robert Kennedy, chief counsel for the Select Committee on Improper Activities in the Labor or Management Field, is still widely unknown. This feud, often described as a blood feud, centered around Hoffa's alleged connections to organized crime and the investigation led by Robert Kennedy, who was supported by his brother, Senator John F. Kennedy. Both men were known for their determined and assertive personalities, and their courtroom confrontations were often intense and theatrical. According to the Washington Post, the clash between Hoffa and Kennedy was marked by their uncompromising attitudes and strong egos. The interactions between the two had a dramatic quality that resembled scenes from a movie. The hearings commenced in 1957. In his book, Vendetta, Bobby Kennedy vs. Jimmy Hoffa, author James Neff portrayed Jimmy Hoffa as a resilient and captivating labor union leader who commanded unwavering loyalty from his fellow Teamsters. Despite facing relentless and incisive questioning from Robert Kennedy, Hoffa maintained his composure during the hearings, which ultimately yielded inconclusive results. Hoffa went on to be re-elected as the president of the Teamsters later that same year. Neff speculated that the union members may have either disregarded the charges against Hoffa or have been angered by the Senate committee's interference. A second hearing held a year later did not significantly advance the investigation, but Robert Kennedy's pursuit of Hoffa was far from over. In 1960, when John F. Kennedy became the President of the United States, he appointed his brother Robert as the Attorney General. Upon hearing the news, Hoffa allegedly made a quip, joking that he would need to hire an additional 200 lawyers to avoid incarceration. Communism. During the 1950s, Robert Kennedy held a strong aversion to communism, a sentiment shared by many Americans who considered the Soviet Union as their primary adversary. Interestingly, Kennedy's anti-communist stance led him to collaborate closely with Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin, a prominent figure known for his vigorous campaign against communism. Senator McCarthy had a personal connection to the Kennedy family, having spent time with them during vacations on Cape Cod and even dating two Kennedy sisters, Pat and Jean. When Robert Kennedy needed employment in 1952, his father, Joe Kennedy, used his influence to secure a position for him. Consequently, Robert joined the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations as a lawyer. However, Kennedy's tenure in this role was brief, lasting just 6 months. He became entangled in a rivalry with McCarthy's chief deputy, Roy Cohn, and grew disenchanted with their excessively zealous methods. Nevertheless, Kennedy's association with McCarthy during those months continued to influence his public image, contributing to the perception of him as Bad Bobby among many liberals. Despite having moved on from that period, Kennedy felt deeply affected by McCarthy's passing in 1957. Historian Ronald Steele described McCarthy as a kindred spirit in Kennedy's eyes. Both engaged in a shared struggle against what they considered evil. Robert Kennedy made organized crime a priority. James Neff affirmed that the prevailing view that Robert Kennedy's cross-examinations of Jimmy Hoffa were subpar. Being a non-litigator, Kennedy faced challenges, and Hoffa deliberately sought to trip him up and cause embarrassment. However, when Robert Kennedy assumed the position of Attorney General of the United States, he made combating organized crime a key priority. According to Neff, Kennedy possessed a specific determination to confront organized crime's corrupting influence on honest labor unions. Interestingly, the long-serving director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, had no records on organized crime at the time of Robert Kennedy's appointment and had shown little enthusiasm for prosecuting those involved in such activities. Nevertheless, due to his brother's presidency, Robert Kennedy wielded enough influence to persuade Hoover and the FBI to shift their focus and start addressing the issue of organized crime. How Jimmy Hoffa got into the picture. Robert Kennedy's aptitude for crusades became evident in his pursuit of communist sympathizers. However, in 1957, he shifted his focus to another target: corrupt labor unions. Serving as the chief counsel for a Senate subcommittee investigating these illicit activities, Kennedy set his sights on the formidable Teamsters Union, which boasted a membership of 1.3 million and wielded significant influence in the transportation industry. Through his investigations, Kennedy became convinced that the union's president, Jimmy Hoffa, had collaborated with organized crime, engaged in extortion, and misappropriated Teamster pension funds. The confrontations between Kennedy and Hoffa during the McClellan Rackets Committee hearings provided gripping theater. Kennedy openly ridiculed Hoffa while subjecting him to relentless interrogation. Hoffa, in turn, evaded questions and feigned memory loss. Their encounters sometimes escalated into intense staring matches, only ending when Hoffa winked. Reflecting on those moments, Hoffa remarked, "I used to love to bother the little bastard." Historian Ronald Steele observes, it was a clash between two absolute figures. Kennedy viewed Hoffa as the embodiment of absolute evil, thus elevating their struggle into a colossal moral issue that fueled his unwavering dedication to the cause. The Jimmy Hoffa and Robert Kennedy feud was ruthless and unprecedented. According to NPR, Robert Kennedy publicly referred to Jimmy Hoffa as the most dangerous man in America. Additionally, Kennedy established an unofficial Get Hoffa team within the Justice Department, which at its peak comprised 20 prosecutors tasked with running grand juries nationwide to investigate Hoffa and the Teamsters. In response, Hoffa criticized Kennedy, stating that he was not an effective attorney general, and likely an even worse senator. Hoffa even expressed concerns about what might occur if Kennedy were to become president, suggesting the possibility of a fascist government. James Neff, discussing the rivalry between the two, characterized it as ruthless and unprecedented based on his research. He was not entirely incorrect. According to Neff, Bobby Kennedy had an ambitious plan to take down Hoffa, and the established Get Hoffa squad within the Justice Department somehow shows as proof. However, it is worth noting that Kennedy's focus extended beyond Hoffa and encompassed organized crime as a whole. Neff, driven by his desire to encapsulate the Kennedy-Hoffa rivalry, sometimes amplifies the Attorney General's personal vendetta against the labor leader, often accepting Hoffa's grievances and defenses at face value. Neff heavily relies on Nicholas Katzenbach's memoir, who served under Bobby in the Kennedy Justice Department. However, Katzenbach denies that Kennedy specifically targeted Hoffa for prosecution or took shortcuts to apprehend him. The Attorney General had numerous other pressing matters on his agenda, including the civil rights movement and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Meanwhile, Hoffa's influence continued to grow, securing his position as the permanent president of the most formidable and influential labor union in American history. Despite facing trial for jury tampering in 1963, Hoffa exploited his power to secure a national master freight contract for his members, which propelled him into the ranks of a renowned labor leader, as noted by Neff. In Neff's intense focus on the gripping confrontation between these two captivating personalities, he misses the opportunity to explore the intriguing side stories. For instance, conservative Republicans such as Barry Goldwater sympathize with Hoffa, viewing him as a counterpoint to the politically engaged unionism advocated by Walter Reuther of the United Auto Workers. Simultaneously, these politicians hoped that investigations into Teamsters' corruption would tarnish the entire labor movement, associating it with criminality and racketeering. To a large extent, their aspirations were fulfilled. The 1957 hearings left a stain that tainted the labor movement as a whole, as Neff points out. The Rackets Committee's efforts culminated in the 1959 Landrum-Griffin Act, which curbed mob influence and significantly complicated union organizing. In the early part of 1964, Jimmy Hoffa finally faced the consequences as he was convicted of jury tampering and received an 8-year prison sentence. This verdict brought a little solace to Bobby Kennedy, who was still grieving the loss of his brother. Merely 6 weeks later, Hoffa faced another conviction, this time for defrauding a pension fund managed by the Teamsters. In early 1967, Hoffa entered prison with a defiant spirit, hoping to overturn his convictions. However, his attempts were unsuccessful. Nevertheless, Hoffa's fortune took a surprising turn when President Nixon granted him a pardon in 1971. Following his release, Hoffa wasted no time in attempting to regain control of the Teamsters. However, on July 30th, 1975, he mysteriously vanished outside a restaurant in Detroit, and to this day, his body has never been recovered. Tragically, Bobby Kennedy's pursuit of Hoffa came to an abrupt end when he was assassinated shortly after winning the California Democratic primary on June 5, 1968. He was shot down as he passed through the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Undoubtedly, Kennedy's relentless pursuit of Hoffa may have been characterized as overzealous and potentially exceeding legal boundaries. However, it is important to note that Hoffa was far from an innocent victim of an unjust vendetta. His actions and behavior justified the intense scrutiny he faced. That's it for today's video. If you learned something new, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content worth your every minute.